Why does Jesus tell Peter, "Get behind me, Satan"? So let's just get right into it. This verse can be found in Matthew 16 verse 23. But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. For you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man." Now this sounds super harsh, right? And if you want the full context, what Peter was actually telling Jesus is that he doesn't want Jesus to go to the cross. In fact, right before that, Peter says, "God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you." And he actually rebukes Jesus. So there's a couple things that we can get from this, right? First, Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me." Pause. "For you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man." First things first, Peter here is rebuking Jesus, his master, his Lord, his God. And he's actually saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you." But this is the entire reason why Jesus came down to earth in the first place. So Peter just cannot see the full scope of things. Or maybe he can see some of it, but he is in denial. And Peter is actually really familiar with denial altogether. Because although Peter was doing all of these things for Jesus, when it came down to it, Peter actually denies Jesus 3 times. Peter actually says he doesn't know Jesus the first time. And then Peter says, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he also says, "Man, I am not one of the disciples of Jesus." And that's when the rooster crows 3 times, just as Jesus predicted that would happen. But the actual Bible tells us that every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that is coming, and now it is already in the world. So anyone who denies Jesus actually has the spirit of the Antichrist. So this is the satanic influence on the world. So by Peter denying that Jesus go to the cross and even saying "God forbid it" and rebuking Jesus, and then later on going to deny Jesus 3 times, we can even argue that this was the spirit of the Antichrist whispering things through Peter's ears and ultimately coming out of his lips, which makes sense why Jesus would then rebuke Peter after Peter rebuked Jesus, saying, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me." Pause. So he is talking directly to Satan. "For you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's." And then right there, he's also addressing Peter. In Matthew 6, we learned that Jesus says you cannot serve 2 masters. So when Peter is actively rebuking his master, when Peter is actively denying his master, he is not serving his master, Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach. Instead, he is serving another master, which then ties back perfectly as to why Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Because at that moment, Peter was not serving Jesus as his master. In fact, he was going against him. He was rebuking him. He was saying, "God forbid you do these things." And then when he goes to deny Jesus, again, he is not serving Jesus as his master. He is instead serving another master. And we learned that this is the spirit of the Antichrist. That's not to say that Peter is satanic or anything like that. I want you guys to understand what I'm trying to say. Peter is then redeemed in a beautiful way. And after he realizes his mistake, he is so devoted to Christ. And I think this makes the testimony of Peter all the more beautiful. He goes from rebuking Jesus, he goes from denying Jesus multiple times, to then in the book of Acts, being redeemed by Jesus, preaching the gospel to so many people, and he's so brave about it. He is even willing to be arrested, beaten, and even put to death. And look at this from Acts chapter 5. Peter and the apostles answered and said, "We must obey God rather than man." So you can see that everything has shifted in Peter's mind and soul, and now he is fully devoted to his Lord, Jesus Christ. And the beauty of it all is that Jesus even tells Peter what's going to happen to him in the future. And you know this if you read the end of the Gospel of John. And Peter still follows through. And the church fathers tell us that he was crucified upside down. That just tells you all the courage that Peter had, that not only was he willing to go and get crucified, but he had so much respect and love for his master, Jesus, Yeshua, that he wanted to be crucified upside down. He felt like he wasn't worthy of being crucified the same way that Jesus was crucified. So I hope I was able to explain this thing properly as best as I can, at the very least. Let me know in the comments what you think about this whole thing and about Peter's testimony, because I think Peter has one of the greatest testimonies in the Bible.